Okay, we are good to go. Alexander, say hi to everyone. Tell everyone how you're doing, and let me check on Odyssey and on Rumble. Hello to everyone on YouTube. Hello to everyone on Locals. Locals is good. YouTube is good. And how are you doing, Alexander? And let me check
Well, I'm
other.
doing wonderfully well, and I'm going to say more than a hi. I'm going to say it's a great pleasure to have you all coming onto this program and listening to Alex and me. And I would repeat again, I mean, there's lots of good things about the work we do, but the best of all is our interactions with all of you on the live streams. I'm not going to say it isn't demanding, because it is hugely demanding trying to keep up with all your questions, but it's really stimulating. We learn an awful lot of information. It makes us also think about what we are saying, because there's no better test to one's thinking than to be challenged on it from time to time. So the live streams are glorious. I love them. They're demanding to do, but you're all. I'm very happy to be interacting with all of you again.
All right, great, and it's great to be here. I think we're all good. I think we're all good.
Excellent.
Well
done.
I mean,
can I just say
Odyssey looks good, and Odyssey is good, and I think Rumble
excellent.
is. I'm waiting for someone on Rumble. Just give me a one on Rumble if it's good.
Yeah,
Locals is good. All right.
Yes.
Alexander, we got a lot to talk about. The first thing I would like to hear your thoughts on, and then you're going to get into the analysis and everything that's going on, because I think we are seeing an end game to all of this. And, we talked a little bit before we went live, like just 2 minutes, but we're definitely seeing an end game to the military operations, as well as to the actual policy, the diplomacy, which is connected to the military operations, which I believe a lot of people are missing. But before we get into any of that, Alexander, we're going to talk about India as well, because I think India's a really big player in all of this.
Yeah.
And when I mean all of this, I mean like this new system, this new world system. We got the sanctions that are being floated against India, which is crazy. But please comment. Lindsey Graham. I know you want to get going. Just before you get into your big analysis on everything, can you just please comment about Lindsey Graham and what he said about assassinating Russian President Vladimir Putin yesterday on, I believe, Fox News. It was.
I know.
What are your thoughts?
I'm going to try and keep myself from saying, some of the usual, the more extreme words. I'm simply going to say that I think it's insane. I think that anybody who had any doubts about Lindsey Graham's, capacity to make intelligible decisions, I mean, this is just now proof that he can't. I mean, what he's proposing is firstly completely, deeply, profoundly unethical. But just think how dangerous it is. We're talking about a nuclear superpower. I mean, a country that can destroy the United States. It can. And if we go back to the events of 1963 in the United States, when JFK was assassinated, there was this tremor across the world. My parents have told me about this, because in the initial hours afterwards, there were lots of, and not just hours, but days, there were suggestions that the Soviets might have been behind it. They weren't. But I mean, the whole world, I mean, we've just been through the Cuban Missile Crisis. It held its breath. I mean, people were really, really shocked, dismayed, and very frightened because of the real risk of a nuclear exchange. Assassinating the leader of another country is an act of war. It is every bit as much an act of war as invading that country, attacking its armed forces, carrying out all the other kind of things that we're thinking about. The Russians would inevitably be obliged to respond. And in the nuclear age, getting into that kind of situation with the Russians is just, as I said, it's just insanity. And Lindsey Graham, I just can't even begin to express what I think about this. I mean, even if he wasn't being serious, which, by the way, I've seen him, I think he was. I mean, it just goes to show how completely out of touch with reality he is, and how dangerous he and people like him are, not just to the world, but to the United States specifically. I mean, the one thing I would say is that there are people in the United States who are keeping a cool head. And we got the confirmation yesterday that the Pentagon and the Russian military, the Russian General Staff, have opened a deconfliction hotline. And that shows you that there are still, as I said, level-headed people in the uniformed military in the United States who understand the lunacies of these sort of ideas.
Yeah, and we should take him seriously because they did the same thing to Gaddafi.
Absolutely,
we saw he died, and they did assassinate a world leader. Whatever your feelings are about Gaddafi, they did assassinate a world leader, and boy, was it brutal. I mean, it was
absolutely. Oh, it was great.
Shocking. It was shocking. Yeah,
it was grotesque. It was absolutely grotesque. But Libya is a small country. That's not to understate the horror of the events there, but it's a small country. It's not a nuclear power. Russia has more nuclear weapons than any other country, and you're going to threaten to assassinate its head of state. I mean, that is madness.
Yeah. Okay, so what's going on, Alexander? The last I heard, the cauldron in the east has closed.
Yes. Yes.
If it hasn't closed, it's going to close within hours. But I've heard it's effectively closed. Maybe there's a small way for some troops to get out, but it's not happening. It's closed. I've heard around 15 brigades, 4,000 or 5,000 troops, soldiers a brigade. We're looking at around 70, 75, let's say 60 to 80,000 Ukraine military, including Azov battalion guys trapped in that cauldron. And then you have Mariupol, which is just a little more down south, which is completely surrounded. And I heard they're going to do a mop-up job to the Azov battalion there.
Yes,
they're pretty entrenched because they've been there for a while. But they're going to just mop them up. It'll be tough, and that would effectively mean the end of the Ukraine military. We've heard reports that mercenaries are now moving in. 16,000 mercenaries from outside Ukraine are trying to move into the country, but maybe they're trying to create a Syria dynamic. You're going to get into that.
The
Syria dynamic. Yeah. So maybe they are trying to create a Syria type of chaos and dynamic out of Ukraine, but. As you talk about Syria, it's something that the Russians dealt with and they know well. So I'm sure they've game planned that out. But what is the situation on the ground? And then talk a little bit about the sanctions hysteria, if anything's happened on the sanctions front. We've seen an absolute war on Russian media. I mean, a war. You can't even access Sputnik RT anywhere in the world. It seems. I think they've switched off the entire internet. The DNS for the IP for Sputnik and RT, which is quite shocking and should be very scary for everybody. Everyone should be very worried at what they've done there. Once again, regardless of the side that you've taken, it's a very worrying development seeing all these forces align to destroy media companies, whether it's RT or Press TV or BBC or even CNN. Any media company should not undergo this type of attack.
Absolutely correct.
We have that, and then we'll pivot and talk about what I believe is the big game changer, which is India and possible sanctions against India.
No. Well, can I just say, first of all, I completely agree with your analysis of the military situation. And let's be absolutely clear about this. What's going on in Kiev is theater. It's people pretending in Kiev that there's a great battle going on. There's actually, as far as I can see, been very, very little fighting in and around Kiev. The Russians are quietly and methodically closing up the access routes. But as we've discussed in our previous live stream, I don't think they have any immediate plan to storm Kiev because they want to keep that government of Zelensky's intact, so that they can negotiate with it. And we had a very, very fierce, apparently furious telephone exchange between Putin and Macron yesterday. You can get some information. There's still some ways of accessing some Russian information, by the way, despite what you were talking about, the media blockades. So I've got a fairly good idea of what the Russian readouts on that conversation say. But essentially, the position is that the Russians are taking a very hard line in the negotiations and the Ukrainians are giving ground, and they're giving ground on humanitarian corridors. And I'm going to explain in a moment the significance of that. Now, But in the military, the real military struggle is in eastern Ukraine. This is what we've been saying all along. The media are not there. The Western media are not there. The reporters are not there. They don't really understand it. It's probably not something that they can discuss well, so they don't really grasp the essence of what's happening there. But essentially, that is the situation. There is the major military conflict is there, and you have two cauldrons. Cauldron one, cauldron is the way the Russians refer to entrapments. Cauldron one, the big one, is where these 60,000 troops are. Now, the point is, it's not exactly like a medieval siege. You don't have a soldier, every 5 yards, with a rocket or whatever it is. I mean, you have fire zones. It means that formations of troops with vehicles and machines and tanks and all of that can't go in and can't come out. So these troops are essentially encircled. And one piece of information that I've got is that they're literally running out of gas. That's the first thing that's running out. They don't have fuel. Without fuel, they can't move their armored vehicles. They can't resupply with ammunition. They start to run out of food. They start perhaps even to run out of water. And remember, we can't survive very long without water, especially if we're engaging in intense physical activity. So what starts to happen in that sort of case is that it may take a couple of days, but you start to see the troops start to break down. The forces start to break down. The people start to give themselves up, or they start to flee. All their weapon systems are essentially left behind. And the Ukrainian army in the cauldron is destroyed. Now, the reason the Russians refer to these things as cauldrons is precisely this. You encircle it, and then you steadily, gradually heat it up. You start shelling, you start hitting people, you bomb them. In other words, you make it incrementally more and more difficult, with the intention ultimately of engineering a capitulation. So that's very much the Russian way of war. It's not, you don't take on people head on. You essentially engulf them, and then you heat up the cauldron until it becomes unbearable and people simply give up. So there's one cauldron in eastern Ukraine, in Donbass. The other cauldron, if it's a cauldron, this is more like a siege, is in the town of Mariupol, where a large, significant element of the Ukrainian military is also encircled. And this is where some of these far-right battalions we've been hearing about, the bulk of the Azov battalion is there. These are very, very committed troops. They will probably want to resist to the last man, conceivably. Now, there is further news elsewhere, which is that Kharkiv itself, this other city where there's been a lot of talk about fighting. Again, there's never been, as far as I can judge, any Russian attempt to storm Kharkiv, though they've sent probing units into Kharkiv. But again, it's been methodically encircled. A man called Arsen Avakov, who is a very prominent Ukrainian politician and who was the interior minister for a long time, and who is widely believed by many people to have been at the central figure organizing all these far-right battalions and all of these. He went to Kharkiv, and the rumor is that the Ukrainians are preparing to pull out of Kharkiv, that rather than lose their troops there in the way that they're being lost in eastern Ukraine and in Mariupol, they're preparing to abandon Kharkiv in order to try to reinforce their positions in Kiev. And given that Avakov is a very hardline character, I suspect also partly the reason he wants his troops in Kiev, if that is indeed what's going to happen, is that he wants to have them there so that he can exert influence on the political situation in Kiev. Now, the other thing that is going on, and it follows from this live stream, the discussion we had with the live stream yesterday is that the Russians simultaneously are conducting negotiations with the Ukrainian government. And it's absolutely fascinating to see how these negotiations are following almost precisely the pattern of what happened in Syria during the siege of Aleppo in 2016 and 2017. So if people take their minds back, there was no frontline assault on Aleppo. They didn't just pour their troops in, storm the city. They negotiated. And firstly, they negotiated what were called humanitarian corridors to get civilians to leave. But of course, the point about humanitarian corridors was that they were intended ultimately to provide a controlled escape route for military units whose position within the city itself had become untenable. And I suspect that that's probably what the Russians are working towards achieving in Kiev too. They want to detach the Ukrainian government from the sort of hard right elements. They want to negotiate directly with Zelensky, but they want all these far right battalions either to withdraw or eventually to become so isolated that they can be destroyed. Now, if you take your mind back to what happened in Syria, the Russians in Syria created a kind of sanctuary area for all these hard right units, jihadi units in the case of Syria, and that was Idlib province. And if you follow the events in Syria throughout 2016, 2017, 2018, you saw that the Syrian army with Russian support would encircle various cities and places. Some kinds of terms of surrender would be negotiated. The jihadis would then leave the cities and they'd be taken by truck or coach or whatever to Idlib province. And I think that something similar is probably what the Russians are working towards in Ukraine. Only obviously this sanctuary area will not be a place like Idlib province. It'll be probably, in my opinion, Lvov, the area around Lvov. Now notice that there's been no Russian military activity in that part of Ukraine. And I noticed that in his speech last week, I mean, it seems like an age ago, but the speech that Putin made directly after the Security Council meeting, Putin made a distinction between the area of Western Ukraine around Lvov and the rest of Ukraine. He said that that area had belonged to Poland and that Stalin had taken it from Poland, almost stolen it from Poland. That was almost the kind of language he was using, and added it to Ukraine, suggesting that he didn't really belong to Ukraine. So you can start to see the contours of a Russian game plan there. You destroy the Ukrainian army in eastern Ukraine. You isolate the hard right battalions. You eventually get all of these people. You ship them out to Lvov. And then you're left essentially in a situation where you can influence, and not just influence, but ultimately direct the political reconstruction of the rest of Ukraine, the area of Ukraine, eastern Ukraine, obviously, which is Russian speaking, central Ukraine, which is part of the pre-Second World War Soviet Union, and which is a core region of the Tsar's empire. So you can start to see the overall strategy that the Russians are following. And as I said in a program I did for my channel yesterday, this is not something I think that Westerners understand very well, because in the West, we tend to see war and peace as opposites. And we also tend to see diplomacy and war as alternatives. We think that when war begins, diplomacy stops. When diplomacy starts, war ends. And I don't think that's how the Russians approach things at all. I mean, if you think about it, it's a little bit like the United States negotiating with Saddam Hussein at the same time as they were invading Iraq. It's not something we conceptualize or which we do, but the Russians approach things differently. They are very much, drawn into the philosophy of Clausewitz, which is that war is an extension of diplomacy by other means. I said the philosophy of Clausewitz, but what many people don't remember about Clausewitz is that Clausewitz served in the Russian army in the Napoleonic Wars. And of course, many of his ideas actually reflect the Russian way of war. So I think this is the way in which we see diplomacy and fighting working together in a kind of seamless way in order to achieve the underlying objective. The objective in this case being a Ukraine which is not going to join NATO, which is going to be neutral, if it really is going to be neutral, or at least even aligned with Russia possibly, and a Ukraine where these hard right battalions no longer operate.
Right. So, I mean, you're looking at a Ukraine where the Russians are controlling pretty much everything from the center of Ukraine, say Kiev, the Dnieper, all the way east, maybe going down south towards Odessa, perhaps connecting. Yes. I imagine their goal is to connect Transnistria as well. If they're going to take Odessa, which is a very important city to the Russians, in a number of ways. In a number of ways, I would imagine they'd go all the way to connect Transnistria because you're not really that far off from Transnistria then, and you have a connection there.
Absolutely.
My question. Okay, great. So then my question is, with this kind of rump state, which is very similar to, say, Idlib, what has happened in Idlib right now or over the years that could give us some insight as to what's going to happen with this rump state? Because I tend to be in agreement that this area could be laid claim by Poland, could lay claim to it. Hungary, absolutely. Romania. I mean, there's a lot of different countries and cultures that, were present there over many, many decades and centuries. But what happens to this area? You're going to have a bunch of Azov guys, a bunch of Reich sector guys, a bunch of far right people that want to. They don't like anybody. They don't like anybody. They don't like Russians. They don't like Greeks. They don't like anybody. And I don't think the Polish or the Romanian or the Hungarian governments are going to want to find a way to deal with them. I mean, they're going to want to find a way to deal with their own diaspora that's there. The Hungarian diaspora, the Romanian diaspora. Yes, they're going to want to find a way to accommodate them. But what do you do with these other forces? What's happened in Idlib with the jihadists there?
Absolutely. Can I just on the topic of them not liking anybody? I mean, one of the most angry points in this fiery conversation between Putin and Macron, which took place yesterday, was that Putin accused some of these hard right people of holding Indian students in Kharkiv hostage, and demanded that Macron exert influence on the authorities in Kiev to get these hard right people to release them. So I mean, and there's apparently been incidents involving Chinese students and Chinese people in Ukraine as well. And I even heard one concerning Africans. Now, I want to say I haven't been able to corroborate all of this. This, to some extent, originates, as I understand it, from Russian media. So, I'm not claiming that it's true, but if it is true, I have to say straight away, it would not surprise me at all. What happens to Lvov, the area around Lvov? The best thing that can happen, in my opinion, the optimal outcome, and I really do mean the optimal outcome, is that it becomes an independent state. It's got the means to, it's be small, but, it's got resources. It's got an adequate population. It will be certainly sustainable. It becomes an independent state. It might be able to prosper. It should be able to prosper. It could join the European family. It could join the European Union eventually. It could join NATO. I don't think Russians would be too fussed about this area, this small region, joining NATO. It could do all of those things, and it could establish itself as a proper independent country, and perhaps over time it might get over some of its sentiments, and who knows, it might even find a way eventually to some kind of an understanding with Russia. So that would be the optimal outcome. The huge danger is that that's not what happens, and that it does become a kind of European Idlib province in which you have all of these mercenary types and volunteers and Azov people circling around as they are in Idlib province, engaging in internecine fighting with each other, as happens in Idlib province, in which case this area, this region of Europe, could easily spiral downwards into a kind of extremely violent, utterly lawless, well, I'm going to say it, Badlands. Now, Kosovo is a bit like that. Yeah.
Can I stop you right there? One quick question. This is a cynical question. Is this Putin's kind of FU to Europe because it's going to be right on Europe's borders?
Yeah, it might be. I mean, one thing that comes across from everything that's happened is that Putin, and not just Putin, are very, very angry with the Europeans. And this is, by the way, this wasn't the sanctions that made them angry. They were already angry before the sanctions. I mean, I'd underestimated the extent to which the Russians are angry. They're much more angry with the Europeans than they are with the Americans. They have a real respect for the Americans because they see the Americans as a superpower pursuing a grand strategy, one hostile to themselves, but they do understand that it is a superpower. With the Europeans, I think they feel that the Europeans have treated them disgracefully. But we're not going to get sidetracked to that. It could very well turn out exactly in that way that you've discussed. As I said, a kind of Eastern European Badlands, which would be disastrous for Europe. And if European policymakers had two brain cells to rub together, they would understand the danger of this. So it would not surprise me if there were some people in Moscow who are actually considering that as a real possible outcome. Give the Europeans this disastrous poison pill, if you like, which would be the area of Lvov. For the sake of the people who live there, many of whom, 99% of whom, are decent people. Many of them have opinions I don't share, but people are entitled to their opinions, and people can change their opinions over time. And I think, as I said, if it becomes independent, it might eventually find its way. For the sake of the people who live there and who are people, I hope we don't have that outcome. I hope, as I said, we have instead the optimal outcome that I said. The danger is that we end up with something else. And by the way, all these weapons that we've been hearing about, the Germans, the Irish, the whoever, the Canadians, they're all ending up in this part of Ukraine, in Western Ukraine. So there's already large arms dumps of weapon systems there. Bring all the Azov people, bring all these mercenaries with all these arms there. As I said, this really is a horrible outcome and not an impossible one at all. In fact, dare I say it, even a likely one.
A disaster for Europe, because Russia, if this is the plan, Russia's going to seal up that border. I mean, they're going to seal that thing shut, right? Absolutely. So, I mean, these guys are not going to have anywhere to go except to turn towards Europe. And as I said, these Azov guys, they're not going to be friendly to Romanians. They're not going to be friendly to Hungarians. They're not going to be friendly to the Poles. I mean, this is going to be a disaster for the countries that are bordering that western part. An absolute freaking disaster.
Absolutely. Can I just add something else? When you have violent men with arms and they're not able to engage in war, they don't give up because they don't give up their arms, because people like that don't do that. What they will probably start to do is to start to turn to criminal activity. Now, here I'm going to say, I'm sorry to sort of pivot away to another region of the world, but I years and years ago, I actually studied the situation in places like Colombia, El Salvador, Nicaragua, all these sort of places. And one of the reasons why there was this enormous explosion in violence and criminality and drug trafficking in that part of the world is because of all sorts of people who'd been involved in the wars that had been happening in these places in the 70s and 80s and 90s, when they couldn't continue just fighting in the way that they were. They didn't just stop, they turned to drug trafficking, violence, and other criminal acts. So we could have something like that on the doorstep of Europe, and that would be a disaster.
All right,
I mean,
so
it just can't even be described what a disaster that would be.
Okay, so before we talk about India, Before we talk about India, do you have anything to say about the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia? My own opinion on this is that this is, I mean, from what I understand, my sources say that the Russians now have control of it. I can't double confirm that. I'm not 100% on it, but that's what I hear. There was a fire in an administrative building, so it wasn't near the reactors. And I'm just using logic, Alexander. I think, number one, why would Russia want to destroy nuclear reactors that are so close to Crimea and to the east? Because they would damage they would damage all. I mean, it would be terrible for all the people in the area. But why do that when the government's approval rating is sky high for this conflict? I mean, the people support it, so why do something reckless like that? The other thing I'm thinking about is that Russia probably built those nuclear power plants so they know them inside out.
Absolutely.
So I mean, they built these things, they know how nuclear power plants work. So I doubt they would just shell them willy-nilly, just start sending shells there to destroy them. And the other thing that I think about is, you've talked about Scott Ritter, how he said that Russia went in there very soft. They've been going into Ukraine very soft and making sure that infrastructure, electricity, internet, water has not damaged. Why all of a sudden would they just start, going to town on this nuclear reactor? It doesn't make sense, but who knows? And anyway,
you're absolutely right. Can I say, talk about, if we can just start with the last point first, going very soft. One of the most interesting things is that when they capture cities, or when cities fall under their control, they leave the local governments in place, and the local governments are allowed to retain the Ukrainian flag. So it's a kind of cooperation. Our army is there. We're not there as your occupiers. We are moving through. You continue to run things. You don't get in our way. We don't get in your way. We're not there to take you over. Now, that may not last, but that's the strategy at the moment. So they are going in very soft. That's the first thing to say. Now, on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, I'm not entirely sure exactly what this thing was. First of all, I mean, factually, you're absolutely right. There was a fire at an administrative building. It didn't affect the power plant itself. Clearly, there was no fighting or threat to the power plant. They've left, by the way, the original people who were in charge there. They're still in charge there. And you're absolutely right. They know that power plant inside out, and they can send people from Rosatom quickly to this power plant if they need to. And I think it is inconceivable that they would shell it. So I don't quite know what happened. Apparently, there may have been some kind of a firefight between the Russian troops and some Ukrainian guards, but it's also sketchy. We don't really know. It's just possible that somebody was trying to create some kind of an incident around this power plant. I know the Russians, at least some of the Russian media, have said that the Russians were worried that somebody would do something reckless with the Zaporizhzhia power plant. And that was one reason why they moved very rapidly to try to gain control of it. So it could be that there was something like that attempted there, or it could be that there was a misunderstanding and a misreport. But regardless, I think this was a minor incident and it's been contained. And I think that the media try to run with the story, but I don't think that there's any real mileage in it, frankly. I think this one has ended. And as I said, I don't think that there was certainly I don't think the Russians would have wanted to shell a nuclear power plant, as you rightly say, so close to their own country.
All right, India, this is a big game changer if India holds and actually goes to this new system. But we've talked about the Quad, which kind of seems like
yeah.
it's fizzled out.
Absolutely.
But and it seems like the Quad didn't give India the respect that it deserves. But
Well,
is this India's moment? I mean, is India
yeah,
now going to be a great power? I mean, it is a great power, but it always
yeah,
seemed that it wasn't at that level of, say, China or the U.S.
yeah.
Is this the moment where India says, you know
Yes.
what, we're breaking from this this current system, and we're going to move to this new system? How do you see things? Because we got news that the U.S. is thinking about sanctioning
Yeah,
India.
I
They're
know.
saying it's not related to this stuff. They're saying it's
Yeah.
related to weapon sales, but it is related to the fact that India has not voted the way the Biden
No,
White
of
House
course
had
it is.
hoped
Well,
they would
of
vote.
course it
Is this India's moment? This is really, really big news. Once again, that not many mainstream media outlets, none, are really talking about. Steve Turley did talk about this in quite
Yeah,
good detail.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I encourage everyone to look at his channel, because he talks
yeah.
about this actually in 2 videos. It's big news. What are your
It is
thoughts?
huge.
And I
It
think
is
I've got
hugely.
Gonzalo in here as well, so he'll weigh in as well. Let me just double check. But Alexander, your thoughts?
I think you're. I think that's absolutely. I mean, this could very well be India's big moment. It would be the moment when India establishes itself as a great power, because what the Indians are saying is, look, our foreign policy is not made for us in Washington. We make our own foreign policy. We take the decisions. You aren't going to dictate to us. And if the United States goes down the route of starting to sanction India, well, all I can say is that is an act of pure, unadulterated folly. Now, I've been reading, I should say I'm not hugely well informed about Indian domestic politics, but I've been reading, those Indian sites that are accessible to me, and which, Indian media, and they've been either even-handed or basically sympathetic to the Russians. And I think that India has a foreign policy, which is its own foreign policy. It has a very close historic relationship with Russia. The 2 countries get on. It's had a difficult relationship with China, but I think the Indians don't feel that they want to get into an issue with China simply because the United States has issues with China. So I think this is India's moment. And I think the Indians have played an extraordinarily skillful game. They have some of the best diplomats in the world. And I think they will hold the line. I'm sure they will. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that the Quad never really worked for them because, again, the United States was trying to use India against China. And of course, the Indians didn't want to be used. They have issues with India, certainly. But I think that they don't want to be put in a position where it's the Americans who are driving them into confrontation with China. Well, what I think the Indians ultimately want to do is to come to some kind of modus vivendi with China, which is in India's long-term interests. So this is a enormously sophisticated diplomacy. We will see whether India holds to it, but my own guess is it will. And to be very clear, if it does, this is the biggest event. This will be the biggest development out of this whole crisis. It will mean that, we've already said the unipolar moment has ended. That would be the final stake in its corpse.
Yeah. Gonzalo, are you with us?
Yes, I am. How do you hear me?
And
Okay.
Gonzalo,
We hear you.
Gonzalo,
We hear you.
it is a great pleasure and, dare I say it, relief to hear from you again.
Oh, thank you very much, guys. Thank you. And sorry I don't have the camera on, but
Okay.
I'm
hear you
too
fine.
ugly. I'm
We
too
feel you
ugly
fine.
for TV.
But
anyway,
you're fishing for compliments.
yes, because I need them.
We hear you. We hear you fine. All our listeners, our viewers, I think they hear you fine as well. So, Gonzalo, how are you doing? What would you like to say first about everything that's going on, and what are your thoughts about India and what's going on there? It's big in the grand scheme of things from a geopolitical level. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I do want to comment on India. I like to comment on everything, but what I really would like to focus on a little bit is the Zaporizhzhia thing. This is the latest info, if you guys are interested. It's being reported on big Telegram channels that are plugged into official sources that the Zaporizhzhia assault or situation, or whatever you want to call it, it started at 2 a.m. local time. and apparently it was a squad, a small group of saboteurs who deliberately went to the to the nuclear power plant and tried to cause havoc. And what's interesting is that the Ukrainian PR machine had it all lined up to start like exploiting a potential catastrophe at Zaporizhzhia. So this seems to fit in with the notion that the Zelensky regime, I cannot call it a government, and I despise them at this point. The Zelensky regime seems to have been trying to either create an actual nuclear accident, though I don't think so, or more likely try to use the situation of Russians shelling a position within a nuclear power station as a way to emotionally manipulate the West into joining this war. I also have heard from people who are nuclear power advocates that the design of the Zaporizhzhia reactor is such that it can withstand a direct hit from a missile. And so this light shelling, because shelling is, of course, always a serious business, but in the scheme of things, with this situation, what was going on was just very light skirmishes, It's not, heavy artillery or guided missiles. And so it would never have realistically harmed the reactor. And apparently there seems to be a quiet kind of understanding between the Ukrainians and the Russians as to what to do with nuclear stations. I mean, the handover of Chernobyl, for instance, was very peaceful, very civil, very professional, and both Ukrainian armed forces and Russian armed forces have secured the Chernobyl station and are allowing the technicians to operate it. So I think it's credible to believe that the Zelensky regime tried to create a provocation, as the Russians call it, to stir up more goodwill to their side. And I have to ask you, you gentlemen, what you think of the following. It seems that the Zelensky regime is so hell-bent for leather on creating these positive PR moments that do you think that it might just start to backfire?
I think.
Can I make a comment real quick before
please,
you?
please
I did get some emails from, especially from one person that's an expert in this, and I just want.
Oh,
I'll read all of it on locals because I can't really read it on YouTube and on live, but here on YouTube. But I will put it on locals. But there is one section I'll just read, and this gentleman that sent me the information says they have a long career in oil and gas production, construction, personal studies in military strategy, tactics, armament operations, and the like. And they said that my opinion from my own background in fraud investigation said this was staged, reflecting on some of the missile strikes on buildings we've seen thus far and other incidences in general. My gut is screaming almost every time. Staged cameras catching the action very conveniently too often. The more I watch, the more this becomes apparent. The incident looks like it was staged in front of one camera available to look like a firefight was preventing firefighters from doing their job. After the show was over, the fire was out and the feed was cut. There's a lot more explanation there, and to everyone that's watching on locals, I'll probably maybe do like a very short video where I go over more of his detail as to how he was explaining everything that was happening, because this was, if I understand, a 4-hour event. Anyway, Alexander, go ahead. I just wanted to get that out there, and thank you to this person who sent me.
No, it's great to know that fraud investigators, of course, would be the first ones to say, "Hey, that looks icky. That looks a little odd."
Yes. I have to say, I think one of the things that has happened over the course of this conflict is that we have one side fights or pursues military strategies, tactics, diplomatic struggles, and all the rest. The other pursues, to an extraordinary degree, PR and media strategies. Now, let's not deny that media strategies are incredibly effective. They are very, very, very effective. But I think always the danger is that if you over rely on them, not only do you yourself start to lose control of reality because you fall into a situation where you're constantly creating stories and things of that kind. But of course, ultimately, your credibility does disintegrate because you cannot, if you're not able to control the events themselves, then
Yeah.
eventually the events catch up with you. Now, I don't know whether either of you saw, I think Alex watched it. There was a program I did last week on Consortium News with Scott Ritter. But I made this point, and, my wife's family, half of them are German. I mean, they lived in Germany. Many of them lived through the 30s and 40s. Most of those have passed away now. But, I had long discussions with them about those times. And they talked to me about how utterly compelling and persuasive the media war that the German government of that period, I'm avoiding use of words, certain words, was. I mean, they believed it right up to pretty much the end. But it didn't stop the Red Army getting to Berlin. It didn't stop the Americans crossing the Remagen Bridge. And of course, when it all failed, the credibility just collapsed entirely. And I think that is the danger. If you're doing everything, public relations, media, obviously you try to close off alternative news because you have to, because otherwise you can't sustain the bubble, and we're seeing all of that. But that can help you to a great extent, but it can't control events. And events have their own kinetic force.
Yeah. My thinking is, it's a motto of mine, is that the Ukrainians are winning the public relations war, but the Russians are winning the actual war. And only one of those two wars matters. And the thing is, I've been noticing something deeply disturbing, that people in the foreign policy establishment have no idea what is going on the ground. Because they view everything from the lens of what's going on in Kiev. And I don't know if you gentlemen have already discussed this. I do want to talk about India, and you might have discussed it. But the issue of those, that estimate between, I've heard ranges of 45,000 to 60,000, and some ranges peg it as high as 100,000 soldiers in eastern Ukraine, near the Donbass contact line. And they're going to be captured. And this is going to be, that's the end. That is the end of the war. Once those men are encircled, there's two options. Either they surrender, or the Russians will say, well, all right, and they just start firing artillery at them until they are done. I mean, it's over, okay? If that double pincer move is finally closed up, which at this time it seems that they are achieving. And I say to myself, these people have convinced themselves of a reality that is not accurate. They say that they actually believe that in Russia there is the likelihood that Putin will be overthrown by his own people and stage a coup d'état. And I'm like, what are you thinking? The entire Russian establishment is on board with this. This is existential for them. And I don't understand where these people are coming from, quite frankly.
Yeah, it's the narrative that they've been promoting, which has started to distort their judgment. It leads to a loss of contact with reality, because if you're not reporting reality and you're reporting fantasies all the time, then you start believe the fantasies. So that is the danger. By the way, I've seen that happen. I mean, in my previous career, when I was working at the Royal Courts of Justice in London, I used to see this happen all the time. I used to see people who came up with these very elaborate fictitious narratives because they would go into court, and they and of course then, as they would questioned, they would fall apart. But the weird thing was that at some level you could see that they were starting to believe in them themselves, because they'd invested so much of themselves into creating these narratives that they weren't keeping track of reality anymore. And it's I think something like that is happening too. I mean, people in the State Department, I think also, I mean, bear in mind, they don't have an embassy in Kiev anymore. They don't have apparently most of their CIA people. I'm sure there are still some people there, but most of their American people have been taken out. So they're basically relying on what they're being told by the people they are talking to. And those people they are talking to themselves, it seems to me, are not very much aware of what's going on because they're so concerned with creating myths. I've seen this so often happen that it's
desperation. Am I right?
It's desperation. Oh, it is desperation. I mean, and of course, you start to see when that starts to happen, you start to see many of the morbid symptoms, the kind of events that the really bad things, which we're
could you elaborate on that?
Well, I mean, you start to see, the idea that the people will rise up and turn the invader back. So you start distributing weapons to the civilian population. You start to see things like that happen, which have no real connection to any real military conflict, but they fall into the concept, the narrative that you're trying to construct, and which you start to believe in yourself. Now, I've spoken too much about this, I think, because this is a little bit psychological. But I mean, but I, as I said, I do speak of what I know.
No, what I find remarkable is that these are extremely educated people, extremely intelligent people in any other circumstances. But to be very vulgar, and please excuse me, but they have bought so much into their own bullshit that they cannot see reality, and they automatically reject reality. And that I find is remarkable. If anybody says, no, that's not how it is, the sky is not green, it's actually blue, they just lash out. They lash out and try to silence. And I think that, look, this is all very amusing at a certain level, but the problem is that these elites, they have control over nuclear weapons. And I am starting to see in the Twitterverse that people are starting to normalize the use of nuclear weapons, which I think is insane. I mean, it's just truly insane. Yesterday, I witnessed a bomb here in Kharkov. The day was extremely quiet, and then in the afternoon, for no reason as far as I could tell, it was far away. It must have been like 4 kilometers or 5 kilometers. I saw like an orange flash, and then 2-3 seconds later, I heard and felt the most incredible sound I've ever experienced in my life. I mean, nothing compares to it. I mean, you've been in the state-of-the-art cinemas with the best sound equipment. Nothing compares to this. It was an unbelievable sound. It just went right through your body, your bones. It was unbelievable. And I would guesstimate. I'm not very good at this, but I would say maybe 4 kilometers away from me. I mean, it was that far. And it hit me, this blast. It was the lone bomb that was dropped all day. I have no idea, and I've been trying to find it, and I don't know yet what it was, but be that as it may, and that was a conventional weapon, and not even a very big one, because the Russians have not pulled out their heavy-duty weapons. And so the notion that, a nuclear blast is not that big of a deal, it's survivable. It reminds me of Dr. Strangelove, the famous Kubrick movie, and George C. Scott saying, I'm not saying we wouldn't get our hair mussed, but 10, 20 million dead tops. I mean, that's insane. But that's what's going on now.
That's exactly. I completely agree, and I think people are saying things that I just wouldn't believe. I mean, it's partly hysteria and anger, but it's also people competing with each other, I think, to show themselves, how tough they are. But of course, that kind of thing has its own dynamic because it creates its own dangers. The one thing I will say, and I've met many people in the U.S. military. By the way, I ought to say straight away, I don't know anybody in the Russian military, but I do know people who have served, many people who've served in the U.S. military. And they've always impressed me as extremely level-headed people who understand nuclear war very, very well. And I think that is going to be, over the next couple of days and weeks, the great sheet anchor that is going to keep us alive, because they're going to come back when they come up with all sorts of crazy ideas, no-fly zones, all that sort of thing. They will say, absolutely not, forget it. We're not going there. This is folly. This is stupidity. This is recklessness. We're just not doing it. On the contrary, the Pentagon has just gone ahead and agreed with the Russian military in Ukraine that there should be a deconfliction hotline. So that means what that means is that the Russians are now telling the Americans that this is where we are. This is what we're doing. They're actually exchanging that kind of information so that, you know, mistakes and dangers are avoided. By the way, can I just, before we proceed, add one little point, which is about the Erdogan's decision to close the Dardanelles, the Bosphorus.
Foolish, I think.
Yeah, with Erdogan, you never know quite whether he's doing how he's planning this out. I think overall, it was again him showing, you know, I'm the Sultan, I control the Dardanelles, I'm you know, on Ukraine's side, I want Ukraine to join NATO. What he's actually done by doing that is he sealed the Black Sea. So you can't get Arleigh Burke destroyers floating into the Black Sea, which, bear in mind, the Russian Navy, I mean, they're all there already, so they're doing all they have to do. They don't need to send more ships there. But I don't think that was what his intention was, but that's the effect of it. So oddly enough,
that's very right. That's very true. I hadn't thought of it in those terms. You're absolutely correct. There's no way now for the for NATO or anybody to float some ships into the Black Sea. And you're right. The Russians already pretty much have all their ships there, I believe, are the ones that they would need.
What were the ones that they need?
The fact that we have the U.S. Military now speaking with the Russian military, I think we're going to end up with a third negotiation now. Everything is pointing to the fact that the conflict is starting to wind down. I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow or even in a week, but I think even the commanders in the U.S., the military in the U.S. is starting to say, okay, we need to speak with the Russians, see what's going on. See what they're planning to do. Make sure we don't have any type of terrible miscommunication or accidents happening, and just try to wind this down. That's my hunch as to what's going on. And I think they've all realized that due to the fact that you have these Azov guys, these brigades, like 15 brigades in the east and in Mariupol, completely surrounded. And the media is never going to report on that because they can't report on that. They can't report on the fact that you have these neo-Nazis stuck in the east of Ukraine and in Mariupol, period. So they're just going to ignore it, and they're going to stick with the sexier story, which is Kiev.
And now Zaporizhzhia, they're gonna go to town on that story. It's gonna dominate the news cycle,
which is a non-story.
24 hours. Which is a non-story, No, my thinking is, I think the Kherson capture is crucial psychologically, because two factors. Number one, they captured a major city, and number two, the way they're handling it. I don't know if you guys, because I caught you, I saw you were on, and so I started trying to get on, but I hadn't actually heard your show before I popped on. But so you haven't spoken about Kherson?
No, not at all. Okay. At least, I mean, I'm very uninformed about things like this.
Oh, okay. Then let me tell you what happened. Kherson was surrounded in the classic cauldron maneuver that they have been doing. That insistent thing of like attacking, then retreat and surround and proceed, and just wait until the apple falls by its own from the tree. And Kherson fell. And what happened was that they allowed the local government to maintain authority. Keep the Ukrainian flag. Everything got restarted in terms of services and all the rest of it. And what has happened? There hasn't been any kind of a roundup of anybody. No kind of like we're gonna shoot all these people or something like that. None of that. On the contrary, it's been very civil. And I think that is psychologically important for two reasons. Number one, this first major city has fallen definitively into Russian control, and number two, the Russians have gone out of the.
Lost you.
I think we lost you, Gonzalo. Are you there? Okay, we lost Gonzalo. Let me know if you're there in the chat, Gonzalo, or hop off and hop on if you can hear me.
Yes.
All right.
Hello. There, you're back.
We hear you now. You're back. You're back. Yeah, we lost you.
Oh yeah. If you lose me, it's no big deal. Okay, don't think that I got bombed or something like that. Okay, a lot of people, and I just have to make a quick parenthesis, and please let me take a little bit of your time. A lot of people have been so kind and said so many lovely things and sending the best wishes. And they get very frightened if the communication drops off for whatever reason. But you have to understand, it's just sometimes it's just the Wi-Fi goes on the fritz or something trivial like that. It has nothing to do with me being in the location I'm at getting bombed or something like that. So I just wanted to allay anyone's concerns, which are greatly appreciated, but don't stress out. And if I drop out, it's just the usual nonsense of tech not working as we wish it would. Okay. So anyway, about the Kherson situation. Yeah, I think that it's going to be a big lesson. And the tragedy I see is Kharkov, because there's been a lot of bombing, there's been a lot of destruction. Because the military just here is trying to hold on to it, and frankly, I understand why. They want to prevent that north pincer from really closing off all of the fighters who are in the east, and so they need to hold on to the city. And so I think it's going to continue to be ugly, but I think that what will happen is that eventually there will be just simply a loss of. I mean, there's always that breaking point where all of a sudden, you just lose your will. And I think that the conquest, or the capture rather, and now occupation of Kherson is going to contribute enormously to that, because we always have this stereotype of the Russians are coming, and they're going to eat little babies for breakfast or something like that. But we are seeing a very civilized, very professional, very controlled military who's rolling in, capturing cities, but leaving them basically untouched, not interested in hurting the people or disrupting their way of life. And so look, the priority should be the minimization of loss of life. That should be the priority. And my objection to the Zelensky regime is that they seem hell-bent for leather in turning Ukraine into Syria, into Lebanon, into Libya, into these countries that are just ruled by chaos. That's what they seem to be about. And I want to prevent that. Because anybody who knows a little bit of history and has seen what has happened to those countries knows that they never recover from that kind of destruction and chaos and misery.
Gonzalo, I completely endorse that. I'm going to say something, actually. I know it's probably going to be unpopular, but in 1968, when the Soviets marched into Czechoslovakia to end the Prague Spring, the Czech government decided to pursue a policy of non-violent resistance. And it won the admiration of the world, and I think it prepared the groundwork eventually for the Prague, the Velvet Revolution and all of those things. What is happening in Ukraine instead is going to achieve the opposite effect. When the dust settles, it's going to turn a lot of the population against the government. I'm going to continue to call it a government, which has led them down this path. So I think it's folly. I think it's an attempt to play up to the media in the West, and I think it's a completely mistaken strategy.
I think so too. I think that to finish off this topic, to tie in a little bit to what you said before, it's like they live in a fantasy land, and it's all about
It's all about chaos. Is what we got.
What it is. Can I? Whilst we're waiting for Gonzalo, just to throw in. I mean, it may be frivolous, and if people aren't pleased with me, well, I'm sorry, but just to explain one thing. Kherson is a Greek name, and again, it was given to this city by Catherine the Great and Potemkin, and it's named after an actual ancient Greek city called Kherson. And of course, the irony is that Catherine and Potemkin didn't get their geography right, so it's in the wrong place. The actual Kherson, the ancient city of Kherson, is in the Crimea. But
Potemkin village.
Potemkin village, yes. I mean, he did actually create lots of places, and he did give them all Greek names, but his grasp of ancient geography wasn't terribly strong.
Okay, Gonzalo has left, but he's back.
Pick up
Let's see.
the India.
Are you there?
Hello.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Am I back? Am I there?
Yeah, you're back.
Can you
we
guys
hear you.
hear?
Yeah, we hear you. Yeah, we hear you.
We hear you. We hear you clearly.
I wanted to pick up the India issue. gentlemen, please explain, why did Joe Biden sanction India, and what are the outlines of the sanction? What the hell is going on?
He's thinking about it. Yeah.
I mean,
but it's out there. It's out in the open now. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. It's. I mean, it's going to anger people in India incredibly. It's treating India.
What did they do?
Well, they're not doing what the US wants them to. They're not denouncing the Russians, voting against them in the Security Council and the General Assembly, joining in the media campaigns and things of that kind. If you know about India and India's long-term relationship with Russia, you would know that this is an incredibly difficult, almost all but impossible thing for India to do. India's relations with Russia go back very far. Go back right to Indian independence. Russia, Soviet Union, was a key ally of India during the Indo-Pakistan War of 1971. The Russians have played a big role in building up the Indian armed forces, in helping India in the 50s and 60s construct its heavy industry base. And of course, all of that has perhaps declined in significance, but it's still something that has enormous emotional traction for many Indians. I think that to expect that the Indians would simply turn aside from the Russians is simply not going to happen. I would add, by the way, and here I go to again talk about, and I apologize again, something from my own past. When I was at university, I took a huge interest in Indian philosophy. It was something that I really embraced massively, the Upanishads and all of this. And one of the things I discovered, and we're talking about the 70s now, 70s, 80s, was that a very high proportion of the best scholarship on Indian philosophy that existed in Europe, if you like, was Russian. The Russians are very, very big into all of this. And that again illustrates that there's this extreme closeness between these two countries. The best translation of the Rig Veda at that time was a Russian one. In fact, the only complete one I seem to remember at that time. And the commentaries that were provided by the Russian scholars were quite outstanding. So these are two countries that have an intense emotional connection. And I think for the US to simply think, that India will just come along on an issue like this and side with the US and start sanctioning Russia is to completely misunderstand the underlying emotional dynamics. And it's going to really, really annoy people in India if the United States starts to put pressure on them in the kind of way that it seems to be threatening to do. I mean, it's going to really go down very badly in India itself.
What's going on in Russia itself, from my understanding of both Russian media and of actual Russians whom I know and I'm in contact with, is that a lot of people are siding with Putin. They are supporting him because of the sanctions, because they find the sanctions so, cruel and stupid and petty, and just, why this hysteria? I mean, because they see it. They see the social media. They see the insanity going on. And so, what exactly is going on is the notion of the Russians, and they're supporting Putin. And also the message that this is essentially existential for Russians. Yeah. It is seeping, or it's not seeping, it's flooding into the consciousness of Russians. Yeah. They're understanding, this is like a big deal. This isn't like Georgia, which for many of them, they saw it as a very peripheral country, no big deal. Yeah. They didn't pay attention to it. And so they were like Putin bad. But it seems that it's percolating through the Russian consciousness that this is an extremely big deal. This is life or death. And that changes the whole dynamic of what they are willing to take insofar as sanctions are concerned. Yes. Because first of all, it seems to me that the West has overhyped the sanctions, thinking that they're actually going to do a lot of damage when they aren't really, because the Russians kind of saw it coming for quite a while now. Yeah. On the one hand, and on the other, it antagonizes the people and makes them follow Putin more. His numbers are through the roof in Russia. Yes. And this is independent polling is saying this over the last couple of days. Yes. And this will only increase as, quite frankly, and I don't mean any disrespect to anybody, but it is very clear that the Russian army will win. And so it's just a matter of time. If there's a huge guerrilla movement afterward or anything like that, that remains to be seen. But the conventional military war that is going on, that's going to be won by the Russians, and that will give a huge boost to Putin. And so all of these sanctions are only driving the people more towards Putin's corner. I mean, it's like the West, the Americans, they keep doing this of hitting people, thinking that they will be their friend if they hit them. It's crazy, you know?
Yes.
It's self-fulfilling, isn't it? Alexander, in a way, because here you have Putin telling the Russian people that this is, like Gonzalo says, this is existential for us. So we're going to go in, right? We're going to handle this because this is an existential threat, because they, and he's looking at the collective West, they want to destroy us.
Yeah.
So he makes his move. He goes in. You know, the Russian population is kind of sitting back saying, is this a good idea? Is this not a good idea? What's going on? Yeah. And what do you have happen? Instead of the collective West saying, you know, we're not going to go after the people, we're not going to sanction the hell out of them. We are going to place some sanctions, but we're not going to look to destroy the country. You know, they do the exact opposite. And they do exactly what kind of Putin was telling them they were going to do, which is try to destroy the country. And so he ends up looking correct in a way. I mean, it's self-fulfilling.
No, you're totally right. You're totally right. By the way, I mean, I have friends in Russia too, and they're telling me the same sort of things that Gonzalo's friends are hearing. I mean, but Catherine also has contacts in the academic world and the academic establishment in Russia, which is, I should say, the humanities academic establishment is one of the places where support for Putin has historically always been weakest. I mean, you know, she's dealing with people who speak English, who travel to the West, who value their academic exchanges, those sort of people. Even amongst them, there is a sort of swing behind Putin underway.
Yeah, and he's being proven right to the degree that these sanctions bite the Russian people. Now, this collapse in the value of the ruble, I think it's momentary. It doesn't mean anything in the longer scheme of things. These kinds of swings happen all the time, and especially with something this surprising. It's not a surprise.
No.
Sorry if you see what I'm saying. But I think long term, Russia is in an incredibly good position. And as we have discussed, and I have to point it out again, Russia, once it has full control of Ukraine, it can close out the oil supply to Europe, the natural gas supply, the food supply, and most raw materials that they need, because they will control Ukrainian grain exports and Russian grain exports.
Yes.
And you are trying to attack them with economic sanctions? Are you crazy? I mean,
yes, I know. Well, Gonzalo, you made a very good point here, because I mean, this is where you see where the difference of a level head. I said the U.S. military has a level head, so you see that there's been no. The extreme steps that some people have advocated have not happened, because there is that sheet anchor of sanity which is provided by the uniformed military of the United States. Compare that with what happens in the other field where the crazies are in charge, and I'm sorry to use that word, which is the sanctions. And they were given lots of advice in the run-up to this. They were told, don't disconnect from SWIFT. Don't go after the central bank. Don't do all of these things. Keep the oil moving. Keep the gas moving. You're going to damage your own economies, your own societies, your own financial system if you go down those routes. And right up to about a week ago, they were listening to their experts, and then there's this massive rush to the head, if you like, and they went off. And then they started to doing reckless and crazy things, which are now playing out exactly in the way that their experts warned that they would. And the financial issues are still to be sorted out. We've still got a long way to go with that. The maps, that won't be taking quite as long as some people think. But we already see in conditions of already very high inflation, the fact that oil prices are now spiking, food prices are now spiking, gas prices are now spiking. Yes, they might tip Russia into a recession this year, It's possible. So, as you say, Gonzalo, given that Russians see this as an existential issue, they will hold out for this. But we're pushing ourselves into recession too. I mean, and who's to say? Our people don't have that feeling that they are under existential threat in the same kind of way. And yes, there'll be inflation in Russia. Well, there already is. And there's going to be more inflation in the West too. This is completely counterproductive.
Yeah, and also from the point of view of the populace, if you will, the Russian populace will be like, okay, just shrug it off and move on because we have to do this. But the Western population is going to get into hysterics, and also the Western population is going to get into hysterics because the leadership is becoming hysterical. And so it just becomes like a wind-up thing. And I think one of the terrible tragedies that happened over the last few months was the Canadian convoy, where, for all intents and purposes, the Trudeau administration, or the Castro administration, depending on your point of view on that issue, the Trudeau administration completely ignored the legitimate demands of the truckers. And not only that, they demonized them. They persecuted them. And so
we lost them again.
We're losing again. Yeah.
They demonized them, they persecuted them.
Yeah. One other point. I just want on the subject of sanctions. Yeah.
Am I back?
You're back. You're back.
Demonized them, persecuted them is where you left off.
I think that was the Canadian Secret Service that was trying to cut me off. But anyway, it's just all kinds of craziness. And the leadership doesn't pay attention to the people anymore. And they're fundamentally afraid and don't like their own people. And so when the people start to really suffer, and they start turning to their leaders, God alone knows what will happen in terms of repression. We're going to start to see like real repression, where the democracies go totalitarian. That seems to be in the cards, if you will. Because I mean, the way the Trudeau administration handled the truckers, and that was pushed by the Biden administration. And Joe Biden actually talked to Trudeau and mumbled his way through whatever orders he was giving Trudeau, and orders that were created by his staff. And that staff is this cauldron that we have no idea what's inside of. What are the ingredients of that? But anyway, the Western democratic leaders, supposedly democratic, are becoming more repressive. And when things economically start going south, how much more repressive will they be? That is a question that I think we should be considering at this time.
Yeah. Everyone should be scared to death at the way the media, the NGOs, the institutions, the athletic organizations, governments, the collective West, how they've moved in complete lockstep to effectively cancel a country. And we saw what they did.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, we saw what they did to the truckers in Canada, which was frightening. But it's like they've taken it now to the next level, and they've done all of this within a week. I mean, everyone should be absolutely scared to death. If I was running a country, if I was the president or prime minister of a country, I would also say, I am out of this Western framework the first chance I get.
Yes.
Because they're going to destroy you.
Yes. I completely agree with this. I mean, this is the thing that has, to be honest, it shocked me more than anything else. And it's also shocked me to read some of the things that I've been reading, which are just unbelievable. And of course, Russians are aware of all of this. And that goes back to what Gonzalo was saying. It has reinforced beliefs amongst Russians that this is themselves and their country that's being targeted. This is what the West really thinks about them. But the point for us in the West is that if they're prepared to go to these lengths, well, there isn't anything they are going to stop doing. And we saw that with the truckers, where things were done with the truckers, which, in my opinion, were completely illegal. And it shows that there are no restraints, legal or moral or political anymore. They're prepared to go all the way in ways that I never imagined possible. Can I just say something very briefly? I mean, I lived through the Cold War. I used to do my little dials on my shortwave radio. I could pick up broadcasts from Russia, from the Soviet Union. Nobody interfered. You could go around London, and there were Soviet newspapers in English. The Soviets actually published English language newspapers, which were on sale. You could buy them. Nobody interfered. During the Second World War, you could find out when German broadcasts in English to Britain were going to happen, because the newspapers in Britain actually told you the time. So that was the confidence we had, and the belief we used to have in our democratic institutions in those days. And what has happened to all of that? I mean, it makes me very frightened, and it makes me very sad.
Yes, it certainly does to me too.
No.
And on that note, gentlemen, unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave because I have some things to attend to here. But thank you so much for having me on once again. It's always a pleasure to talk to you guys. And any information, I'll be sure to send you an email about it and tell you what's what. Okay.
Stay safe. Stay safe, my friend.
Stay safe, Gonzalo. Absolutely.
Take care, guys. Thank you.
Take care. Bye. Bye.
All right. Always great to listen to Gonzalo. It's really good that he's doing well and he's safe. Alexander, let's knock out. Got a lot of questions. So let's. You want to knock them out?
Yes,
we have to do a hard stop soon. Yeah.
Yes.
How much time do you have?
I have to stop at in just over 45.
Okay, let's not. We've got a lot of good questions, a lot of good comments. Let's knock them out. And
right.
Let's see. Let me go to a comment from yesterday, which I missed, which was from Stu281. The split in the Orthodox Church would put millions behind the Russian government.
Absolutely. I'm sure that's true. I would add to the point that Gonzalo was making that there's been one or two pictures of, actually quite small crowds, in my opinion, talking to Russian troops and, but overall, there doesn't seem to be much resistance, such much civil resistance to these moves, especially in southern Russia, in southern Ukraine. And I think that the Orthodox thing is the importance of it is underestimated. When a government starts interfering with people's religion, that is something that is always sensitive. And when they do that in a place like Ukraine, which is of course part of the Soviet Union, which pursued a very, very strong anti-religious policy targeting the Orthodox Church, I'm sure that's going to have even greater traction.
Yeah, well, religion and language is what they messed around with.
Absolutely,
never goes over well.
Let's
see. Von Punky, welcome to the Duran community. Freedom Autopsy Report says Joe fomenting war to distract from his Burisma crimes.
Well, indeed, but I come back to what I was saying. I was on several times. I mean, the opinion polls in the US are still going bad for him. In fact, they're getting worse. And anybody who watched that dismal State of the Union address would see why. I mean, I thought it may have been, and I'm not exaggerating here. I'm not, saying this because I have feelings about Joe. I mean, it was, I think, the worst State of the Union address I have ever heard. It was completely uninspiring. Even George W. Bush's were better than that.
Yeah. And the people behind him didn't help either. They were looking very weird. Pelosi was making
I know Pelosi. Do you know what that reminded? Do you know what that reminded me of with Pelosi? I'm sorry, I have to say this. There's a you can find it. There's a film of Stalin, making a speech, and you have his sidekicks Molotov and Kalinin, and they start applauding before he says anything, and it was just exactly the same. It was
Schumer did that. Schumer stood up and
Schumer did exactly before he said anything. I mean, it was just mumbling. It was so weird.
It's all theater.
It's all theater. Yeah.
Let's see. Muhammad says, just to say, go on with your good works and making sure people conscious and raising consciousness. Yeah. Thank you, Muhammad, for that. Solgato said, Jamu Baraka for president. Thank you very much for that, Solgato. Lexman, well, thank you for your super sticker. B. Muller, the U.S. populace does not support DC warmongers. Thank you for that, B. Muller. And rhinos, let's not forget Lindsey Graham is a rhino as well.
Yeah.
Republican in name only. Let's see. Toilet sauce. VCOIM poll. 68% of Russians approve of the special military operation / invasion.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard 74 from other polls, 73.
Absolutely,
so,
absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. But it's very strong support, and I think it's going to grow.
Yeah. Dejan, thank you for your super sticker. And Christine, welcome to the Duran community. JK says, thanks both of you for sanity and logic during the emotional hostage situation in the U.S. The establishment uses the citizens as pawns for their own self-interests. Yeah, Alexander, whenever you see Lindsey Graham, Schwab, Soros, Clinton, MSNBC, CNN, even Fox News, all the companies, all aligned, the NGOs, all aligned in one direction, that's when you know you should at least question what's going on. At the very least, question what's going on. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. And when they're trying to prevent anybody else putting in an alternative view, you should question. You should be even more careful in believing what they're telling you, because they don't want you. If they don't want you to hear the other side, that means that they're not really confident about their argument, despite what they may say.
Yeah. Life of Brian says, is Lindsey Graham stupid or following orders? The neocons are trying to use this to recapture the U.S.
Can I just say, why are the two in conflict? Why can't he both be stupid and following orders? I'm sure it's an element of both, actually. And on your second point, yes, the neocons are trying to, I'm going to say, consolidate their control of US foreign policy. They never completely lost it. Trump went against them, but they proved too strong for him, or at least too embedded for him. Of course, if things change, if there's an election, if in 2024 Trump comes back, then it changes, that dynamic changes. But just to say this, I got an email today from someone in the United States, very well connected, who made the point. And I'm just one of many people who are this person's correspondents, some very influential people who are this person's correspondents. And the point this person made was, if they can cancel the Russians, they can cancel any Republican campaign in 2024, especially if it's led by the right, wrong sort of point.
Yeah, everything that you see that they're doing to the Russians, I mean, what they did to the truckers, what do you think they're going to do come 2024? Yeah, absolutely. And just real quick on going off of that, they'll cancel the Russians to the West, but the Russians they're just too big to cancel. Absolutely. And they're going to do their own thing. And I just want to say that what you're looking at is the Russian culture and civilization, the Chinese culture and civilization, most likely the Indian culture and civilization. And isn't it fair to say that you're also going to see the Iranian, the Persian culture and civilization jump on that train as well?
Absolutely correct. I mean, you're going to see all these great civilizations which have enormous resilience. I mean, then they're going to, they already see themselves as under attack, but they can withstand this because they have these enormous millennial roots. But our civilization in the West is being attacked by a cancer within ourselves.
Exactly. While our civilization is being attacked from the inside, they're gonna go off and do their own thing to preserve their civilizations, and they're gonna find ways to work together, even though there is a lot of tension between some of those countries. They are gonna, I believe, find ways to work together. It wasn't long ago where Russia and China had a lot of problems and a lot of disputes, and they worked it out.
Exactly, not long ago at all. And if the Chinese and the Russians can do it, be very clear. I know people will deny this, but India and China can do it as well. And I'm sure one day they will.
Yeah. Commando Crossfire says, to be objective is to be Russian. With it. Smiling. Thank you very much for that. Taffy says, hope it helps a bit with your $5 super chat. Thank you, Taffy, for that. Weeson, welcome to the Duran community. Bram says, about far-right battalions, what about international volunteers? These guys will return trained, radicalized, like those that went to fight in Syria. No? The Russian military defense also said that they're not going to treat them, Alexander, under the Geneva Convention either, these foreign mercenaries.
Absolutely, because as far as they're concerned, they're not real troops, and I'm sure that they will take a very hard line against these people. So, um, the danger is not that these people will make a difference to the actual military conflict, because they can't, they won't. The danger is if what I speculated at the beginning of this program happens, and there's a kind of sanctuary area created in Western Ukraine. All of these people end up there. Then you're going to have a, 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 a region of Europe with lots of very dangerous, violent, armed men, and that could very easily become a Badlands. I mean, like Idlib is, of course, a Badlands in Syria. I mean, even if you go to the Turkish media, even they admit it. Kosovo, to a great extent, is, but this would be on a far worse scale. So the more people like that you sort of draw in, the more dangerous and unstable the whole thing becomes.
Yeah. Rich says, off topic, the Blitzkrieg was developed by the Italian general Ettore Bastico, who first applied it very successfully in the Spanish Civil War in the Santander offensive.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. I'm not a military person, as I often say. I'm not even much of a military historian, but I am aware of that. You're quite right about this.
J.K. Wynn says, so gross to see the U.S. government pandering with disrespect to our flag, merging with the UKA, I guess, Ukraine, and in appropriating 4 Republican reps crying to the press about her family. Sad, but not her job.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with this completely. Totally agree. I cannot. This is where I'm sorry. I know I'm repeating myself. I still cannot comprehend that this is the United States doing these things to itself. When I remember the United States, I mean, and what the United States embodied for me. There it is.
Badachi says, as an American at a German school next to the NATO base, I'm the only one critical of the current narrative. Posted a picture of Azov in the school group chat. Then I was attacked as a pro-Russian neo-Nazi. The Azov narrative is starting to see a lot of sunlight. I believe that is going to see sunlight. They'll try to repress it, but it's going to come out there. And when it comes out into the open, then I think a lot of people are just going to be like, I wasn't supporting Azov. I don't know what you're talking about. They are using Zelensky as some sort of shield because they're saying, well, look at Zelensky. How could he be supporting the Azov battalion? But like we said in yesterday's live stream, Alexander, Azov predates Zelensky. I mean, it was under Poroshenko. It's been there and it's embedded.
Absolutely correct. I speaking of Zelensky, he did a press conference yesterday, and even the Financial Times said that he looked exhausted, unshaven. He was sitting on a stool in a corner of his the conference room in his presidential building. He looks a broken man, and I think that he was brought in. I've really come around to this view now that he was brought in and manipulated in order to provide this image to conceal the sort of Azov side of things. It's never quite worked with Poroshenko, so you get this actor, Jewish background, all of those things. So you're able to say, well, it can't be, you can't have Azov because the president himself is Jewish. So, this doesn't add up. The reality is, of course, the Azov people don't like Zelensky. And I think he has been treated in a very cruel way, in a kind of a way.
Yeah. Dunamis says $50 super chat. Thank you, Dunamis, for that. I don't think that President Putin is bluffing about using nuclear weapons.
Well, he hasn't actually said that he's going to. I mean, I don't think he's bluffing. I don't think he's ever threatened to use nuclear weapons. All he's done is remind people that Russia has them.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a different thing.
Yeah, specifically after Liz Truss was running her mouth off about
absolutely
stuff. Liz Truss should just keep her quiet. She does a lot of damage when she starts talking. David S., thank you for your super sticker. Arabian Princess says, will Putin push for Moldova, Sweden, Poland, etc.?
No, I don't think so. I think he's got enough. His hands full already with Ukraine. This is going to take a long time to sort out. I mean, even if we assume that, even on the basis of our analysis, the way we've discussed it, this is going to absorb Russian political and diplomatic energies for a long time, sorting out, getting all the pieces in Ukraine fixed. So I don't think he's got time for Sweden, certainly. I don't think Sweden is going to join NATO, by the way. I mean, I may be wrong, but I don't think this is... I think that there was a lot of wild talk about that a few days ago, but I think even that's starting to subside now.
Okay, Shekarag says, hi, gents. Are you familiar with Kim Iverson? Recommended to anyone to see Western propaganda towards Russia via video manipulation on YT. Yes,
No, I haven't.
Kim Iverson. Yeah, she did a breakdown of...
Yes.
Right. Yeah, she just did a breakdown of Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah, well, I will certainly look at that then. Yeah,
it was a good breakdown. Thank you for that. Rich said Poland, Romania will come with a cap in hand to Moscow for help against Western Ukraine because Poland doesn't have the capacity to control them. Only Russia has.
Yeah, well, maybe. I mean, if again, our analysis about Western Ukraine turns out to be correct, which I believe it will, by the way. I ought to say this. I mean, I am very confident that that is going to be the eventual Russian game strategy. Decant all these people into Western Ukraine. Then that's a massive problem for Poland. And who does Poland look to in order to control it? Sooner or later, it'll have to look to Russia, because where else can it go? Germany.
Ursula von der Leyen won't be able to.
Exactly. Well, Ursula von der Leyen, of course, I forgot all about her. I mean, she's the master of this sort of thing. She will know exactly what to do in this kind of situation.
It's a poison pill. It's like you said, it's a poison pill, it seems. Yeah. Void Ray, thank you for your super chat. Paul Silent says the U.S. is entirely responsible for EU and NATO expansion, signaling to Ukraine they could join, turning their back on Russia and ultimately sealing their own doom.
I completely agree. And I read an article yesterday in the National Interest which said that the original sin in this conflict was US backing for the Maidan, call it Maidan Revolution, the Maidan coup of 2014. I disagree. The original sin was that disastrous decision in 2008 at the summit in Bucharest to say that Ukraine would one day be a member of NATO. The moment they said that, that set in train the events which have led to the crisis we see now. It was a disastrous mistake. There were lots of stages along the way where it could have been turned round, Minsk agreement being one of them. It never was, and the result is that we are in the crisis that we are in today.
Yeah. JT says, in return for playing the president of Ukraine, Zelensky has received more than $1 billion from the oligarchs and has purchased a $34 million villa in Miami.
Yeah, well, one day maybe he'll enjoy it.
If he can get there, yeah.
We'll see. Get there, yeah.
We'll see. Yeah, Juha says there is a whole world outside the EU and the US.
Absolutely. Of course there is. Most of humanity, in fact.
Big world, yeah. M says, what do you think about Finland joining NATO? Biden meeting today with Finnish president and the prime minister could create a coalition in parliament for NATO.
Well, I personally don't think it's going to happen. I don't think the Pentagon will be particularly keen at the moment, to be honest. I don't think they want to escalate the situation anymore. But if Finland joins NATO, I mean, that's obviously something that the Russians will be very angry and unhappy about. I don't think it's as existential for them as Ukraine.
Commander Crossfire says, best case scenario, how long before Russian economy recovers? And what would it look like after the conflict is over? Also, the worst case scenario, most likely case.
Okay. Well, I was reading an article in the Financial Times yesterday about this. The Financial Times being a media outlet, it is implacably hostile to the Putin government. It speculated that the worst period for the Russian economy will take about 6 months, and then that there will be a recovery. Now, worst case scenario, economy stabilizes after 6 months, but growth rates are very low. And essentially you get Iranian type stagnation plus high inflation. I don't think that's going to happen. Best case scenario is that the economy stabilizes, inflation is brought under control. You see a revival in industrial growth, which happened in Iran, by the way, after the sanctions. There has been a very significant expansion of industrial production in Iran as local industries have filled the gaps. And we see Russia integrating itself with China, India, other economies, and gearing up to a perhaps more stable growth pattern than the one it's had up to now. So I think it's the second, which is the more likely or plausible to me. It will mean a much more controlled economy than Russia has had up to now. But then that's what most people in Russia want. This is the thing people don't understand. Opinion poll after opinion poll after opinion poll, going back all the way to the 1990s, has shown that Russians prefer a controlled economy to a completely open one.
All right. Oraba, thank you for your super sticker. Samuel, thank you for that super chat. Max says, Coach Red Pill guys, get his attention. Tell him to send me a link on email. Yes, thank you, Max, for that. And we did get Coach Red Pill on. And thank you for the super chat. Toilet Sauce says, it appears that Elvira Nabiulina is not facing sanctions. Make your own conclusions about that.
Well, indeed, that is a very good point, actually. I mean, there's no reason why she should. I wonder whether that means, because I mean, up to now, she's been very loyal. I mean, I can't really see any evidence that she's trying to undermine Putin or the government, but whether in fact it's the Fed and people like this who are known to have argued against sanctions, against the central bank, whether it's the Fed, which is saying, look, for God's sake, you've done this reckless thing. Let's keep some kind of line open to the Russian central bank, so that we don't completely burn all the bridges. That's a very good point, actually.
Yeah. Paul says, Russia warned the U.S. and Europe back in 2008 that Georgia and Ukraine were off limits for joining NATO. They were ignored, and then annually resulting in Georgia conflict and now the Ukraine conflict.
Absolutely. This refers to the... I mean, there was this exchange between William Burns, who was the U.S. ambassador, and Lavrov. And Burns advised the U.S. government that NATO entry for Ukraine would be an absolute brightest of red lines, as he put it, for the Russians. And, the US just went ahead anyway. And, you had people like Stoltenberg saying, Russia has no right to a veto, no right to, no right to object. Well, we see that they are objecting. And we see how that they're objecting with 100,000 men. And that's a very compelling argument in the end.
At Fraser, thank you for the super chat on Odyssey. And where am I here? One sec. Sidebook VR says, if Ukraine becomes Syria 2.0, Putin can use it as a jobs program for unemployed Taliban. Come and fight in NAZI and earn rubles for your homeland. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Very good point. Yeah,
But,
love that.
I don't think it'll get to Syria 2.0. Well, the western part's going to be a headache. It's going to be a headache for Europe. I don't think it'll be a headache for Russia.
I agree with that, yeah.
I think they're going to build that wall around it.
Yeah, they're going to build that wall, exactly. Yeah. Well, why wouldn't they?
Yeah. Maybe they can recruit Kamala to help them out. Since
what would happen? What would happen? You see, if that happens, if Western Ukraine becomes the kind of Badlands, it will help to consolidate whatever political structure the Russians want to build in the rest of Ukraine. That's, after all, what's happened in Syria. However difficult conditions are in Syria, most Syrians look across to what the situation in Idlib is like, and they say, we'll stick with the government we have because the alternative is so terrible.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sanjeeva says, I'm really skeptical that India will hold the line, given its very weak economy and divided internal politics. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, on the contrary, that he probably will hold the line. But I take your point, and we will see. I think that the Indian defense, foreign policy establishments, and obviously many people within the Indian leadership take a different view, and I think they will hold the line. I think for them also, it is the indicator that India is a great power. It's not a vassal of the United States, and I think that's important to them.
Commander Crossfire says, with Russia cut from the West economy, could it start to invest in North Korea with all the rare earth minerals there? Could it afford to do that?
Well, it can afford to do that. And, I was actually thinking about this last night because, of course, given that Russia is already sanctioned, why shouldn't the Russians start to provide oil and gas to North Korea? I'm not sure. I'm not saying they will, by the way. I mean, I think they have concerns about North Korea themselves. But, they might whisper in the ears of somebody in Washington, well, if you take this too far, you've got all these problems with North Korea. We don't really. So, if you want our cooperation, you will limit what you do. I'm not saying that's going to happen. That conversation is going to happen. But I can see how it might.
Yeah. Herding Cats, thank you for that super chat. Ak Lee, thank you for that super chat. Hong Kong 200, thank you, Gonzalo, and please stay safe. Thank you for that.
Oh, yeah. Add to that too.
Yeah, absolutely. For X Touring says, all these right-wing groups push towards Europe, combined with the inevitable economic downturn. In the years to come, Europe could become a very sad place of criminals and drug lords.
I'm afraid you're absolutely right. I've already said that this whole affair is the moment when I think Europe has tipped over into irretrievable decline. And if we now have a Badlands in Western Ukraine influencing the whole of Europe, then, I mean, that's going to be very bad. Can I just say something? I mean, I live in London, and I'm not talking about Albanian people, because Albanian people are the same as everywhere else, but the Kosovo War did create a whole criminal subculture there. And if you're talking about things like the trade in certain drugs, anybody who lives in London knows who dominates it, and also who's very involved in human trafficking and all those sorts of things.
XCL Nav, thank you for that super chat. And Anatoly says, Azov headquarters in the southwest of Mariupol, metallurgic factory, has been hit. Losses unclear. Some sources claim 20 people, 10 units of equipment. Others, the battalion has been destroyed.
Well, we'll see. I mean, we'll have to look that up. I mean,
Mariupol's going to be hard. Mariupol's going to be hard.
Mariupol's going to be hard.
It'll be.
Yeah, it'll be taken. Look, I thank you for that, Anatoly. And definitely, it's something we need to keep an eye on. Yeah. But I mean, we're doing our live stream at the moment. We can't keep track on all of these events.
And Anatoly's keeping track. Thank you, Anatoly, for that. Life of Brian says, it will be hard for the U.S. to blame a false flag on Putin, as he isn't connected to the global gang of shadowy mercenaries. They're brainstorming, though.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Of course they are. I actually have to say, I think that at the moment, they believe they can spin anything. I think they can twist any story round to follow the narrative that they want. And I think to a certain extent, they're right. The problem is, as I said, that doing that all the time does cause you in the end to lose touch with reality. And I think also reality does have an ability not just to seep through, but to break through.
Yeah. Max, thank you for becoming a member. Elaine says, should I be feeling sick than I was a few days ago, or is it too optimistic? Huge thanks to you three. Thank you. Well, right. It's going to be tough. So we're tough times ahead. It's going to be very tough.
We're going to very tough times. What I will say is this is a tipping point. And if things turn out the way I believe, which I confidently will, then things globally and between US and Russia might start to improve. Europe, I'm afraid, is a different matter. And I think people in Europe need to recognize that we've now crossed a very, very, big line. And I don't know whether we can turn this round.
Yeah. Indigo Jones says, can you comment on the claim that Ukraine foolishly gave away its nukes to Russia? I find the Ukraine with nukes a scary thought.
Well, it's not true. We've discussed this before. Ukraine never had nukes. The Soviet Union had nukes in Ukraine, and they were part of the strategic rocket forces, anyway, whatever it was, that the Soviet military establishment. When the Soviet Union broke down, those military units, which were amongst the most highly trained and disciplined in the Soviet armed forces, became part of the Russian military and continued to take their orders from Moscow. And by the way, the US wanted it that way. So these were never Ukraine's nukes. Ukraine never gave them away. The Russians then, with Ukraine's agreement, brought these weapon systems back to Russia. But Ukraine never had nukes to start with. This is a myth. They were always first under Soviet and then under Russian control.
Yeah. Darlene, welcome to the Duran community. 4X Turing says, sanction SWIFT, move over to the Chinese alternative. Sanction internet sites, move over to the Russian Chinese alternative. Decoupling is happening already.
Absolutely, completely true. One of the other things is, I think that some people in the West don't understand that, we're not pivotal. We don't dominate everything in the way that we used to 30 years ago. And I don't think they've yet understood that there are alternatives out there. Once upon a time, I can remember, even during the Cold War, during the Cold War, it was the West, which is immensely rich and very, very powerful. Soviet Union was far less rich. It was, much poorer, but they were the world. Everywhere else was a sort of battleground. But today, it's not like that anymore. The world is completely different, and I think, especially in Europe, people just don't get it. I think in the US they get it more.
Divine Insurgent, according to Telegram channel, Intel Slava Z and the Neocon AZI unit shelled a hostel that had Indian foreign exchange students in it.
I've heard this as well. In fact, I think this comes from the Russians, that there's been incidents like that in Kharkov. I think this was in Kharkov, but I understand that there's been incidents like this happening.
Yeah. Thank you for that super chat, Sabrina. Thank you for your super chat. You keep us sane. Thank you for your hard work. Thank you very much for that. Satoshi Nakamoto, thank you for the NOK super chat, super sticker. Thank you very much for that, Satoshi. Anatoly says, Lindsey Graham called for Putin to be assassinated. Yes,
I know. We discussed that. It's a terrible thing to say, crazy thing to say. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Rit says, USSR sent their warship in the Bay of Bengal during the 1971 war with Pakistan in order to counter the U.S. warships sent to help Pakistan. Russia is the true friend.
The USS Enterprise, the aircraft carrier, was sent into the Bay of Bengal, and that made the Indians very, very nervous so I understand, during the Indo-Pakistani war, and the Soviet Union acted to counter it and gave unstinting support to India during that conflict. So that's apparently a very powerful memory in India today.
Yeah. Robin W. says, I've heard from Dmitry Orlov, that there is fighting between the Ukraine troops and the Azovs in Mariupol. Yeah. And there will be.
Well, I'm sure there will be. Orlov is an interesting person. I should say I don't agree with him a lot of the time, but even when I disagree with him, which is quite often, I still find him interesting.
Yeah. Lentech FM says, thanks for all the informative streams. Thank you very much for that. Glenn, thank you for your super chat. Gavin, thank you for your super sticker. Good Vindip. Can Russia demand the oil and gas and wheat be paid for in ruble? Will that help prop up the ruble?
No, there aren't enough rubles around the world. And can I just say, doing that also might have a destabilizing effect within the Russian economy itself, because if you do that, you would create a massive demand for rubles, at which point the ruble would appreciate to ludicrous levels. And I think that might be incredibly bad for Russia's other industries, for the parts of the Russian economy that want to provide goods to the Russian population. It would render them almost immediately uncompetitive. I think that the whole issue of the ruble needs a whole separate program, actually. I think what the Russians are moving towards is a controlled currency. And obviously the ruble has been under intense pressure this week It's not actually had that total collapse that I think some people were expecting. But I think that the days when you can just convert rubles into dollars and all that is passing. That was something that the liberals did in Russia in the 1990s and early 2000s. And the reason they did that was because, of course, they wanted, the oligarch class wanted to be able to take its money out of Russia at any moment. But all that's ending now. And I think that you're going to see a controlled ruble. And I don't think they will want to try and force people to, at the moment, to use the ruble in order to conduct that kind of trade with them.
Yeah. Density says, I'm 100% in agreement with Alexander in his pessimism about the direction of Europe, considering what continent to escape to before it's too late.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for that. Let's see here. Anatoly says, what's with South Korea and the Russian sanction?
Yeah, what I've heard about it is this, which is that the South Koreans, who are obviously allies of the US, and they've got the US military there and all that, have said that they do want, that they will support the sanctions. But they also want to carve out lots and lots and lots and lots of exceptions. So South Korea, by the way, has had excellent relations with Russia over the last 20 or so years, and they don't want to end those completely. So they're trying to hold off on doing all the comprehensive sanctions that the West wants them to. What they will, of course, doing is they will stop supplying to Russia the very, very top end microchips. But I believe the South Koreans don't export those much anyway. I think they're made by Samsung mainly for its own products.
Indigo Jones says Lindsey Graham should consider that many Americans feel more offended by his life and career as a neocon than they feel threatened by Putin.
I agree. I completely agree.
Thank you for that. FBI Glow Boy says, has the West already crossed the Rubicon and the die already been cast for all the parties involved, or can fences be mended after the fighting is over? Voters in the states do not support this at all.
I agree with that, and I think you will find that there is a fundamental division here. I think the US is much more likely to re-establish connections with Russia than Europe is. I think, one of the things that's become absolutely clear to me is that the Euro establishment, the Ursula von der Leyens, the Charles Michels, before that the Barrosos, all of them, they absolutely hate Russia. They viscerally loathe it. It's a strong sovereign state. They don't like those, and they don't like to share the European continent with them. And they were heavily invested in their Ukraine project, and that's all gone. I don't see any flexibility from those people, even if, and I think if Ursula goes, whoever replaces her will be just as bad.
Yeah. Indian from Jay Galt says, Indian Punchline just released a piece evaluating the conflict as one between Orthodoxy and the West. Also suggested this motivated Australia Djokovic conflict.
Interesting. Okay, I will read that. Badra Kumar is a very interesting commentator, and of course he was an Indian diplomat and comes from a diplomatic family in India. And I mean, he's always interesting and perceptive, actually.
Zariel says, a quick question on your opinion of the mayor in the West Ukraine town who was kidnapped and shot as a traitor supporting VPU Zelensky, losing more than he knows.
Well, again, I want to be very careful about these stories because I've heard about this and I've seen this in many places, but I can't corroborate this. I think it's highly plausible. If it's happening, it's a sign of desperation. I mean, it's the kind of thing that it does remind you a bit of the last days in Berlin, to say it straightforwardly. I mean, when a lot of that was going on. And of course, what it will do is it will create a massive revulsion amongst a lot of the population.
Yeah. Indigo Jones says, if we have another oil embargo, think about the legacy left by Bush, Kerry, Obama, Hillary, McCain, Romney, all of them presidents or candidates.
I wholly agree with you. I mean, I come back to what I said. I mean, the military keeps the crazies under control when it comes to taking military action. Unfortunately, it's become absolutely clear that when it comes to sanctions and economic warfare, the crazies are in control. I mean, they're doing ludicrous things, and they're tipping us all into an inflationary crisis, which it's impossible to see how we can get out of without a very serious recession. I mean, which will be as bad as anything we've experienced since the end of the Second World War. I mean, it's lunacy to see what they're doing.
The working man says, with all the sanctions and the cancellation of a country, the global American empire has been outed as literal communists.
Mm-hmm. No, well, let's. I like the fact that you've added empire to this, because, I mean, again, what it demonstrates is the enormously authoritarian trends of these people. It shows, however, their power, because they've been able to do this to a degree that I would never once have imagined possible. I mean, driving TV channels off, so they're
off everything
within a couple of days. I mean, without any decision by regulators. I mean, when it was firstly discussed in Britain, I mean, there was talks about doing this, and there was talked about, and it was going to go to, I can't never remember the name of the British regulator, Ofcom, I think. Ofcom. And Ofcom said, we're going to look at this, we're going to discuss it, we're going to see what happens. Well, Ofcom has made no decisions. It just happened anyway. I mean, it's just the plug is pulled without any real proper procedures followed.
They're going to do this to everybody.
Everybody. And that tells you how reckless they become.
Yeah. Divine Insurgent says, this may be a dumb question, but why are so many so-called conservative media outlets defaulting to an anti-Russian position? I guess it goes with Neocon.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've answered your question. I mean, unfortunately, and we have to understand this. Neocon thinking, which is the same as neoliberal thinking, it is to be found both in what it calls on the part of what calls itself the right, and on the part of what calls itself the left. They are embedded everywhere.
Zariel says, speaking of Zelensky, he plays piano with King Dingaling and wears high heels. Don't believe me? Check it out here on YouTube. I believe you, Zariel. I definitely believe you.
I absolutely believe you.
Naz says, is it true that Putin is doing this because there used to be pipelines going through Ukraine in the past and he wants to access to it? I heard that. Thank you for your great videos.
There are pipelines going through Ukraine still. They weren't there in the past. They still exist. They are still there. So, don't assume that those pipelines don't function, because they do function. I don't think it has anything to do with control of the pipelines. I think it's got everything to do with the eastward expansion of NATO.
Yeah. David March says, just read Canadian media saying Putin is about to declare martial law. Kiev under heavy missile attack. I watched multiple live cams of Kiev. No fire. Yeah.
No, I've never heard.
Can I just say real quick? They get all the West, all the media outlets in the West get all their information from the Ukraine Military of Defense, the Ukraine Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Communication. We saw the same thing happen in 2014, where they had the civil war, and the Ukraine Ministry of Defense and Communication was saying that it's any day now that Ukraine is going to steamroll Donetsk and Lugansk and take it all over, and they're going to make their way into Russia. It never happened. So
exactly.
Just be careful of everything you're seeing and double, triple check it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mitswitch says, I remember you guys said with Angela Merkel this would never happen, but I like to make that point and drive it home. Ursula von der Leyen was very much her mistake.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Angela Merkel has made terrible mistakes, and this is her legacy. This is what she achieved. I mean, a German chancellor, more than anyone else, especially one who speaks Russian, should have understood how sensitive the issue of Ukraine was for Russia, and should have made absolutely clear that nothing happened there that would disrupt the relationship between Russia and Germany and Russia and Europe. And Angela Merkel completely screwed up.
Indigo Jones says, what happens if Russia turns off the gas to the EU?
Mm-hmm. What happens indeed? We go cold. The short answer to that.
Short answer to that. Amrit says, Italy, Germany, Japan, and 3 major Axis powers have been under the control of the U.S. at least since the 90s, much to the contrast of their great histories.
Yeah, agreed. I agree completely.
Well Valias, thank you for your super chat, Valias. Thank you to all our moderators, Valias, Sariel, Alan Watson, Reckless Abandon, GEC, Cosmic Rain, Spartan Warrior Queen. I think they're all in the chat. Thank you very much. Thank you, Valias, for that. Crasium says, once China comes out and play, USA will leave Europe like they left Afghanistan. Europe is like a Versailles during Louis XIV or Venice.
Well, I agree with that, actually. I'm going to say something else. And I mean, at a certain fundamental level, and we must never forget this, the US abandoned Ukraine. I mean, they pulled out their embassy, they pulled out all their people, they talked about their support for Ukraine. They didn't actually do anything for Ukraine. And in a way, this is a pullout of the US from Ukraine. They're pursuing a scorched earth policy as they retreat, which is what the US has done in Afghanistan, but there are certain similarities. And of course, the US could do the same to Europe. They might do one day.
Kurt Fram said, last time Russia was hit hard was 2013. It took 4 years to get its GDP on track, but they were never in a big crisis. Now, of course, it's a bigger hit.
I agree with that. And I think the same, but I think the same is going to happen. I think this time, bear in mind, and this goes back to what Gonzalo says, if they can stabilize the situation in Ukraine, most Russians will think it was worth it. I mean, it's difficult to overstate how important Ukraine is to Russians. And I mean, you know, Kiev obviously is a seminally important city. The Donbass is very important. And of course, Odessa. And a lot of Russians, I mean, the Russians have very, very strong feelings about this particular part of the world.
J.K. Wynn says, Congress photo op had mutilated flag top, U.S. bottom, Ukraine. If those who promote war had to fight, we'd see less. When did Kosovo stop being Europe?
Well, indeed. Well, indeed. Very good points altogether. Yeah.
Rital, thank you for your super chat. Divided Surgeon said, which politician is more comical, dumb, or speechless, Kamala Harris or Liz Truss?
It's a tough one, actually. I mean, I don't
Kamala.
know.
I go with Kamala.
I would go for Kamala at the end of the day. Yeah.
Gloria, I appreciate your perspective. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much for that. Indigo Jones says, thanks so much, Duran. You are wonderful. Thank you very much for that. Sheila Fisher, thank you for your super sticker. Elaine Diaz says, sorry, I'm late. Have you talked about the U.S. threatening India with sanctions? Yes, we have.
Yes, we have. Extensively, actually. Yeah, we've discussed India extensively. Yeah.
Thank you for your super chats. It's towards the beginning of the live stream, but we think India will hold the line, but we'll see.
Yes, we'll see.
Eric, thank you for your super sticker. Moonbeam says, is MAD really a deterrent to wider war? Might any side, given the mutual assurity, simply wage war as per usual with neither daring to go further?
I think that MAD is a deterrent. I think that the militaries on both sides understand very well that if you start getting into a conventional confrontation, remember, war is very difficult to control. It's an incredibly difficult thing to control, but especially if the Russian and American military start fighting each other. And, you know, these are the two big giants. They start slugging it out in that kind of way. Then, especially with the kind of political leaderships we have in the West, the ability to contain that and to limit it to a conventional struggle is going to be incredibly difficult. So I think the militaries are aware of this. I think they take they made mutually assured destruction. I think they take that extremely seriously. I think they understand all of this. And as I said, there are a sheet anchor of sanity in this situation. I don't mean
Tim,
General Milley, by the way, but I mean,
yeah,
but
or Lloyd
there are
Austin,
or Lloyd Austin. But I've been following over the last year or so the people in the United States who are in charge of the strategic forces, and I have to say I found them impressive.
Yeah, Imre, it's fun reading the chat in real time with 80-minute delay on the video. I'm late. Good day. Thank you very much, Imre, for that super chat. Timmy Kukumis, thank you for your $50 super sticker. Thank you very much, Timmy, for that. Frank O'Reilly, thank you for that super chat. Iris, it's true that Spain sent weapons to Ukraine. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. They're all
They
doing
are,
it.
yeah.
They're all doing. I should add that so far, as far as I can gather, these are all light arms.
They're meaningless. I know as a fact that the Greek weapons being sent are old and just not usable, but it's the optics of it.
It's the optics of it. And of course, if you start sending these kind of arms, they're exactly the kind of arms that if they fall into the hands of the Azov type people, I mean, they can spread all over Europe.
Exactly. Neurosurgery says Ukraine is a battle for reality.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Brendan,
that is brilliant, by the way. I love that.
Hold on to
that.
Hold on to that. Brendan, thank you for your super chat. Rob Janot says, coffee for the mods. Gratitude for such comprehensive and caring reporting, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rob, for that. Michael Crane says, European countries are busily impounding yachts belonging to Russian billionaires. I suspect this is to encourage an assassination attempt.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, there's this constant idea that, if you put pressure on the oligarchs, they will, overthrow Putin in order to save their yachts. It's based on an utter misunderstanding of how Russia works.
Heyman says Francis Fukuyama didn't specify that the end of history required a friendly Russia or defeated Russia. U.S. doesn't fear anybody else. Easy pickings.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think Francis Fukuyama, by the way, whose book I've never read, but I've heard summaries of it. I mean, I think what he basically said was that, we've reached this ideal state now, and the United States needs to promote it because any alternative to this perfect neoliberal system is going to be a degradation. So I think that was his concept. That was his idea of the end of history. The idea of this, that the neoliberal model, ultimately the globalist model, is the only acceptable one. I think that, and that the United States exists functionally to enforce it on everyone. I think that was Fukuyama's view.
Elena Diaz says Germany throwing stones to Russian-owned businesses, a nasty reminder of times long gone. How long before Russia roars against Berlin?
Oh, indeed, yeah. There was a very, very tough statement from the Russians over the cancellation of Nord Stream 2. And the Russians said that the way it was done has created an irreparable breach between Russia and Germany, which is, of course, one thing that the neocons wanted, and they've achieved it.
Yes. Sparky says government officials who might otherwise be okay get too much intelligence from mainstream media news. They're too old or lazy. Their aides are young and naive.
I think that's entirely true.
Very true.
And of course, that is very, very true.
Good statement there. Rich says South Korea is the leader in memory chip production, mainly, and 5nm chip node. Also, Russia can still import memory chips from China's CXMT and Yangtze memory and have plans to make their own in Russia.
Absolutely, of course. And they will. They will do all of these things.
Sniping Heist, thank you for your super sticker. Forever says Scott Ritter's hypothesis on this is that the United States planned sanctions from a long time ago and use Ukraine as a pawn to implement. They are using Ukraine as a tool to get regime change in Russia.
I agree with him. I think that we're talking about the United States, I think the neocons have been working this out for a very long time. I think all the guys in the Atlantic Council, this is very much their long-term strategy. Everything the neocons ever do ends badly. It always fails. And I'm sure that's going to be true of this particular enterprise as well. I would add that I think it's their big throw and their last one.
They're throwing everything, yeah.
They're throwing everything. If this doesn't work, then, as I said, their project is ended.
Yeah. Take a pick. 1313 says, love you guys because you do unbiased job as possible. Alex M. Why does the West think that SWIFT can't be replaced or bypassed? It's baffling to me. Adversity breeds invention. Your presence on alternative channels is proof. Thank you for that $50 super chat.
And I agree with you. I think that again. I think that people in the West aren't aware of the scale, for example, of the Chinese alternative to SWIFT, which is almost 3 times as big in terms of the transactions that it processes. Now, I didn't believe that when I first saw it, but it turns out it's true. I think that, the Liz Trusses of this world don't realize that.
Shady Lady, thank you for your super chat. Elena Diaz says, is it Ukraine in the pram down the stairs of Odessa in the battleship Potemkin?
It certainly is. Absolutely. It is indeed Odessa. Now, of course, at that time, when that film was made in the 1920s, it was the Soviet Union. And when that particular incident, the mutiny in the Potemkin, happened in 1905, it was all part of the Russian Empire. But Odessa is, for the Russians, one of the most symbolic cities. It is difficult to convey how central it is to Russian culture. Mm-hmm.
Indigo Jones says, in Russia and China, could we be looking at a new Byzantine like we saw after the fall of Rome?
Yeah, I understand what you mean. I think we should be careful with these kind of exact parallels, but certainly we will see a different kind of civilization. And of course, to the extent that Russia is a part of European civilization, which at some level I think it is, I mean, it will continue it.
Bonnie Eyes Jenkins says, to the woke crowd trolling the Duran, Alex and Alexander are non-binary thinkers. Thank you very much for that. Christine, thank you for that super chat. Mark says,
just to say that very soon I really will.
Yeah, we've only got a few more. We've only got a few more left as well.
Yeah.
Mark says, this is all Ukraine's fault. They provoked all of this. They had 8 years to fix all these problems. People, do your research. How many people they killed in the Donbass? But media doesn't want to cover any of that bull crap. Well said.
That is very true. It's absolutely true.
Yeah, very, very true. Terry, thank you for your super chat. Sparky says, many Indian citizens work for big tech, including social media. Will they influence companies from within? Will they have work visas removed?
I don't know. I'm not going to speculate. I mean, and I hope we don't get into
I don't think they will.
Situation. I don't think they will.
I don't think that'll
practical.
happen. No. I think India will hold firm, and I don't think they'll look at the big tech side of things. Heyman says, isn't the liberal order required for us to get along? Won't China, India, Russia, and Persia be at each other's throats after the fall of the Borg?
Well, that's possible once the Borg falls. It hasn't yet fallen. So, I mean, there is that's a point to make. I want to make. History never stops. So simply because, one Borg goes, it doesn't mean that history has ended. It just means that the players have changed.
Exactly. Well said. Let's see. Dominique, thank you for that super chat. And the last one, Lost for Words. We all have to be careful not to become useful idiots for the West or for Russia.
True. So true. I mean, we're not. I mean, we are worldly people. Alex is from a diplomatic family. I'm from a political one. We've traveled. We've seen the world. We know perfectly well that you mustn't ever assume that anything, anybody, any government says is the truth. One just always has to apply skepticism and rigor. And if one does, then one can carry out the kind of analysis that we like to do.
All right. Scarecrow says, good evening from Phnom Penh. Duran, thank you very much. Scarecrow and Density says, the power that Western elites presume that Russian oligarchs hold over the political system is probably huge projection, revealing the situation in the U.S. rather.
So true.
Very true. Very, very true. And
very true.
Welcome, Naz, as a new member. And that's everything. One more from Gender Neutral. Your work is invaluable, a bright spot in a dark time. Thank you very much, Gender Neutral. Alexander, any final words? I know you have to run.
No, I have to run.
We covered everything.
As I said, I think we've covered everything. The military situation is where we need to focus on now. And I think that, as I said, I think you're absolutely right what you said at the beginning of the program. We're in the end game.
All right, everybody, take care. Thank you very much to all our moderators. Thank you to everyone on Rumble, Odyssey, our awesome locals community, everyone on YouTube, the chats, the super chats. Thank you very, very much. We have videos coming out tonight as well, my channel, Alexander's channel, and we'll be doing more shows. Take care.
Excellent.